If you like the content, consider joining the channel. Subscribe, like, comment, and share. Please continue your prayers. Continue to grow. And without further ado, let's start the show. Assalamu alaikum, my brothers. Welcome back. I am the Rican Muslim. Today we're going to talk about the historicity of Jesus' resurrection. And from the words of Bart Ehrman, a scholar, New Testament critic, textual critic, and world-renowned author and expert in the New Testament. So let's begin, shall we?
I had an episode with William Lane Craig, and he put forward a historical case for the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. And I remember in that podcast, I sort of listening back had wished that I pushed back a little more. And a lot of people actually noticed, and they said, I'm surprised that you didn't really give them a bit more grief for it.
Yeah.
But I figured that perhaps rather than making a botched attempt at doing it myself, it would be better to ask you. I mean, his view on the matter, along with many others, is that we have a few facts about Jesus that we can pretty confidently say are true. Firstly, that, a man called Jesus existed and was sort of going around teaching an ethical code of sorts and gaining followers, got into disrepute with the Roman authorities, was killed by crucifixion, and that afterwards, groups of people claimed to have seen him.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, no, he was not killed because he was a prophet of God. He was a Messiah. And God rescued him from it. And they believed that they did in fact crucify him. That's what I will push back on.
Do you think that all of these facts are sort of well established?
Yes.
So given that, how do we explain the fact that all of these are true at the same time?
Oh, well, I don't see any trouble at all. We have other figures in history for whom we have things like that with those four facts. I mean, Romulus, the founder of Rome, I don't know if he was a historical figure or not, but people thought he was, and he certainly ended up somehow leaving the earth, and people there were eyewitnesses saying that they saw him alive afterwards.
I mean, do we have sort of, firstly, are the sources as reliable? Are they as well attested? Do we have
now that's another question. See, that's not one of your four things.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm asking about is when we say that these facts are well established.
Well, Livy, the historian Livy, so he's a Roman historian, and he reports that. Or Apollonius of Tyana. We have eyewitness testimony to his being raised from the dead. Or
what eyewitness testimony are we talking about? Like who is it that claims
followers of his?
Like groups at the same time, they sort of all see him sort of all in the same room, or
but see, now you're getting into other facts. See,
yes.
So the question is, what are facts? So if you're just talking about those four elements, then we certainly have those four elements. So they're not difficult to explain. What William Lane Craig wants to do, though, is to take those four facts and start adding others to them as if they're the same value.
What other facts are we talking about here?
Well, he says that we know that there was an empty tomb.
And you don't think that that's the case?
I don't know.
And one of the things that I think Dr. Craig might say on that point is that if people were claiming to have seen him, if people were claiming that this man had risen from the dead, the tomb was there. It was something people could have gone to check.
But who are these people? Again, there is no proof of all these people. It is more of a hearsay than anything else. Written on 4 books, they are completely anonymous. So where's the actual proof of that? Because there really isn't. You have 4 accounts that are completely different in every single way, all showing a contradiction of each other. So when you have that, then okay, which one is the one that's correct? They all can't be correct. And who are these people? And how do we know? Because they said all these people saw that. Okay, who? Give me some names. And if that was true, why are all the accounts different? Exactly.
And it would have probably been one of the first things that they did
Mhm.
upon hearing that this Jesus figure had
Yeah.
risen from the dead. If there were no empty tomb, surely someone would have discovered this. This is not
Yeah.
good evidence confirming the idea that there was, in fact, an empty
Well, it
tomb.
presupposes that he was buried in a tomb.
This is one of the facts that that William Lane Craig thinks we can say is well established, that he was buried in a tomb.
Yeah,
That's
we
important
can't.
to him. You don't think so?
No, I don't. I mean, that's the thing. He takes these 4 things that, basically everybody would agree on.
Mm-hmm.
There's a man, Jesus, who got killed. And later people said they saw him alive. So that's fine. I mean, those 4 are easily explained. Was there an empty tomb? There are very big problems with thinking there was a tomb at all. He's presupposing that the gospel story is right, that Joseph of Arimathea took Jesus the afternoon he was crucified and put him in a family tomb. And on the 3rd day, women came and found the tomb empty. Okay, so what is our evidence of it? Well, the evidence, of course, is only in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They say that. And it was the tradition that Christians had for a very long time. So it's certainly the Christian tradition. But there are lots of reasons for doubting that it's right, that he's never taken very seriously. But, I don't know if this was on your thing or not, but somebody last week was interviewing me and replaying some things where he was trashing me for some debate we had 20 years ago, where he said that, the only reason I reject resurrection is because I've got some kind of warmed over Humean understanding of things, and I've never read Hume. It's like, it is just so wrong. It's just like, it is just, it's just factually wrong. But apart from that, he says that I'm not a historian. I don't know what he thinks. I do know what he thinks I am. He thinks that I'm a textual critic, whatever he thinks that is. And that's just completely wrong, too. It's just like he knows nothing about me, but he's making stuff up. So historians look at what you know about the situation at the time period. And I'm not sure William Lane Craig has even read much history about the time period. But one thing to look at is, for example, just as an example, what do Romans do with crucified victims? So we have records of, we don't have lots of records. I mean, one of the really interesting things that people don't realize, we have no literary description of a crucifixion from the ancient world. Like, nobody describes how they did it. Like, were they typically nailed? We know they were nailed sometimes because we have some nails that with DNA on. We've got that organic material on them. Were they tied? Were they crossbeams? Were they stakes? There's all sorts of stuff we don't really know. We do have a number of references to what Romans did once the person died on their crosses. And the accounts are consistent that what they did is they left them on their crosses as part of the humiliation.
Yes.
That they would decompose on the cross and be attacked by scavengers. And so we have off-the-cuff remarks in a number of sources that that's just what they did. And so there are debates about that. We can have debates about whether that happened within Judaism or not. People say, yeah, Jews didn't allow that. It's absolutely right. Jews didn't allow it. But the Jews weren't killing it. The Romans were killing it.
Yeah.
and so forth and so on. So
I think that's why they use, it's almost like they're merging both. Yes, Jewish people would never do something like that because whole life is made by God. But it was the Romans who did the supposed execution. But now they want to say, well, they did it, but they also followed the Jewish tradition because they were somehow afraid of what will happen if they don't. But that wasn't the case because they were never afraid of the Jewish people to begin with. They followed whatever Roman law was in place at that time. And there's more accounts that kind of contradict historically what it is said on 4 Gospels that are written anonymously by people that we don't know who they wrote them. Where are the sources? And that's why we have this weird sources that call the Q and M and so on, which is where they get the sayings of Jesus. Well, where does this stuff come from? So there's just not even that, of course, 4 different accounts of what really happened. Even after the resurrection, the accounts are also different as well, and you can't actually put them together because they don't match. So it's a matter, okay, well then it's one of them is correct and all of them are false, or all of them are false to begin with. They all cannot be correct.
I don't know of any instance where we have a verified account of anybody being buried on the afternoon of their crucifixion in a known tomb. So how likely is it that they made an exception in the case of Jesus? I mean, we think they would because, he's the Son of God, and so he's exceptional. But I mean, Pilate didn't know that Jesus was the Son of God. He was just one of the guys he was crucifying that morning.
It's still quite an exceptional case. I mean, Pilate seems quite distressed at the fact that Jesus ends up going to...
According to whom?
To crucifixion. Well, according to the gospel narrative.
The Christian narrative.
But this is a possibility.
He crucified... It's possible. It's possible he's more upset about one of the other two guys.
If it is true that you have an instance of Pilate really not thinking that this man ought to be crucified and asking the crowds.
No, but I don't think that's historical. Why would we think that's historical?
I guess I'm not trying to make the case that it's that we can know that this is the case, but this might be an explanation as to why we do have an instance of the Romans making an exception when it comes to sort of leaving someone on the cross. Because Jesus was exceptional, not just because he was the Son of God, because of course I don't believe that, and the Romans wouldn't have believed that, but that it was still an exceptional case.
Why?
I guess in the case of Pilate, this might have been someone who he really didn't think deserved to be crucified.
Why?
Because this would be the case if the gospel narratives are correct, if what's written there is correct.
That's right.
Again, I'm not claiming to be able to say that we know that they are, but if...
It's circular reasoning. It's all goes back to, well, that's what the Gospels say. That's it. Doesn't matter what you put forth. It's just, well, that's what the Gospels say. Well, which Gospel? Okay, which one's correct? Who wrote them again? Where to get this from? Well, it doesn't matter because the Gospel says so. Well, the church tradition. Well, it's a possibility. That's the problem with the entire Christian narrative. It's circular reasoning. It goes back to, well, where's that from? The Bible. It doesn't matter what you keep asking questions. It's going to go back to what was written in the Bible. That's what they'll say, but it's really written in the Gospels, which we know are anonymous.
If they were, this would offer an explanation of how we have an exception.
But the argument then is, if the gospel narratives are correct, then the gospel narratives are correct. And so that's not an argument.
But it seems to me that might be the case if the narratives were written so as to obviously give an explanation as to why Jesus was taken down from the cross. If it was clear that...
Yes, the gospel writers are explaining why he would be allowed off. That's right.
It doesn't seem particularly plausible to me, though, that the idea of presenting Pilate as slightly disturbed by the idea of Jesus being crucified was a device that was used to explain why Jesus would have been taken down from the cross when Romans didn't usually do that.
No, the reason for showing
seems a little far-fetched.
The reason for showing Pilate's disturbance is something else. The reason that when you look how Pilate's portrayed in the Gospels, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and then you even add on later Gospels, like the Gospel of Peter and later Gospels, when you do that and you line them up chronologically, Pilate gets more and more disturbed. And he starts, in Mark, he and kind of the Jewish council, they agree, okay, he needs to be crucified. In Matthew's gospel, he washes his hands and says, I'm innocent of this man's blood. And the crowd cries out, his blood be upon us and our children. When you get to Luke, a little bit later, Pilate declares Jesus innocent 3 times. And he sends him off to Herod, who declares him innocent. When you get to the Gospel of John, he declares him innocent 3 times, and it says in John, the chief priests and scribes insisted to be crucified. And when you read it in the Greek, it says, Pilate then handed him over to them to be crucified, to the chief priests and scribes. When you get to the Gospel of Peter, it's even more. Pilate gets increasingly innocent, proclaiming Jesus' innocence. Why is that? Well, scholars have long known the answer to this one. If Pilate's not at fault, then who is? It's those damn Jews. They did it to him. So the reason for Pilate's exoneration is in order to heighten Jewish culpability. I don't think that's a historical motif. If you actually know anything about Pilate, I mean, if you read the descriptions in Philo or Josephus, this is not somebody sat around agonizing about crucifying the wrong guy. And to think that Jesus is the exception just means that we're so used to thinking of Jesus as the exception. But for Pilate, he's just one of these troublemakers. He's calling himself the king of the Jews. Crucify him.
But now, a moment ago, you said that, okay, William Lane Craig is wrong because he says that we can know there was an empty tomb, and we can't. It seems to me a relatively minor detail in that you said, we have these 4 facts, including that Jesus was crucified, and including that groups of people claim to have seen him after he died. And you say, and these are...
I'm not sure groups of people claimed.
Okay, because this is what I wanted to pick up on when you said that this can be easily explained. What is it that you think can be explained? The fact that we have records of groups claiming to see Jesus, the fact that groups did actually claim to see Jesus, the fact that individuals claim to see Jesus. What are the things that you think, this isn't troubling for us to explain without having to invoke a resurrection?
I don't think it's troubling to invoke the idea that there were individuals who claimed they saw Jesus alive afterwards. I don't think we have good attestation for it. I think the Apostle Paul claims he saw Jesus alive a few years afterwards. And so I think, I don't think he's lying about it. I think he probably thought he saw Jesus.
Paul, also being our earliest source of the New Testament, claims at one point that Jesus appeared to 500 people.
That's right.
And what is 500 people? Name one name. Just one. Where? Where are they from? What do these people believe? Did they believe at all? Again, it's so many problems with the narrative of the church and on the New Testament. So many problems on there. All you have to do is just sit down and look. Of course, they don't want to look beyond the 4 canonized Gospels, but when you start taking just the other ones, and not as canon, not as divine, but just as literature that was used in those times, you see the development of the Christology, even in that time, trying to make it more and more and more divine. It becomes way more anti-Semitic as it continues on, making Roman guards as even people who are more pious than the Jewish people, even though, again, Jesus himself talks about how the Pharisees are the gold standard that we must all follow. You can see how more like this hatred towards the law continues growing, especially with Paul, who just hates the law, hates everything about it, calls it a curse. It is all this just hatred towards the Jews, towards the law, and the ritual law, and it's just mind-boggling for anyone to not see that, not see how this is not just wrong, but it just doesn't make any sense on there. And I will follow the Quran and continue on. Jesus was not crucified. He was saved by Allah. And you could see glimpses of that even in the Psalms, because there's a promise there for the prophets, the major prophets of God, written in the Tanakh. And that is why I believe what the Quran says.
This seems to be some good evidence that we do have.
No, I don't think so. Paul knows there's a story that 500 people saw him, but I don't think that's evidence that 500 people saw him. That's a claim, and so a claim isn't evidence. Evidence is when you try to substantiate the claim. And so how do you go about establishing whether 500 people actually saw Jesus? Well, you look at what Paul says, and then you see, are there other sources to corroborate it? Paul's writing before the Gospels. None of the Gospels mentions anything about this, or the Gospel sources. So Paul's our only source. And so is he right or not? Well, it seems like if 500 people saw him, that this would be something that other people would mention. So I don't think we know. The thing about seeing things is that we have all the time, we have people who see things that aren't there. And a lot of evangelical Christians say, look, if you've got group visions, you can't have group hallucinations.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. So how do you explain Mother Mary showing up to hundreds of people at one time?
Well, I think I understand what you're saying, that we have examples of groups of people claiming that they've seen something that we don't actually believe they did.
Yes.
However, it seems in the case of the group sightings of Jesus, of the gospel narratives, we're talking about a man like physically walking into a room, interacting, talking with these people.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not like sort of seeing a vision of Mary.
We have modern accounts of Jesus showing up today in all sorts of circles.
But
physically showing up.
I don't suppose that we have accounts of a man who dies being seen by groups of people physically in the flesh, talking to them, interacting with them, allowing them to sort of touch his hand, and appearing to people who spent significant periods of their life following them. And so, it's not like they could have been mistaken about the identity.
We certainly do have that of individuals in the ancient world. We have accounts of Romulus appearing to a senator and explaining what's happened to him. And so I think that, and my view of this is that the kinds of evidence we look for Jesus needs to be the kind of evidence we allow for anyone else. And so it's striking to me that evangelical Christians focus on the Jesus materials, but they don't look at traditions that are comparable from the same period or since. And so they say, well, you can't have group hallucinations, but they think that's exactly what you have when the Blessed Virgin Mary shows up. Or they say it's different because Jesus' disciples saw him. Well, okay, but that's true of Apollonius of Tyana. Or that they'll say, well, but so many people have come to believe this, that it's implausible that would happen if so many people believe. Well, there are about 2 billion people in the world who think that Muhammad was physically taken up into heaven. So do you use the same criteria, or do you make exceptions in your case?
But to have
exceptions, they always make exceptions. Always. And they use a circular reasoning for that. And it all goes down to where it says that in the Bible. That's it. That's always where the argument ends. And that's where the argument begins as well. On there. Even though it is clear that things have been written by anonymous people, not just been changed, and they cannot corroborate anything. Again, you just a simple question as to who are these 500 people? Why wasn't this mentioned here? Why wasn't that so important that we mentioned everywhere? Just like the accounts of The Walking Dead, you would think that would be everywhere in all of the Gospels. Heck, why wasn't Paul talking about it? Again, even their own scripture that they use to try to, justify it, can't even hold water and explain simple logic of what is written in there to begin with.
have all of these things together in one example. I mean, you're quite right that you have a sort of an ancient account of an individual claiming to see somebody, and then you have a modern account of groups claiming to see a vision of something, and then you have lots of people coming to believe something that they didn't see themselves. But put them together, groups of people seeing a sort of physical, physical sighting of a man who they used to know and followed around, and lots of them coming to believe that's the case all together seems to be a higher standard of evidence.
None of those people in any of those groups attests to it. You see what I'm saying? We don't have groups of people saying they saw Jesus.
We have individual writers.
We have writers saying that groups of people saw him. And that isn't the same thing. You actually do have groups of people saying they saw Mary. And so that's stronger evidence.
The full
and that is correct. Using that reasoning, then all Christians then should just follow the Catholic Church. But they don't. It's almost like, it's like the picking and choosing of certain things that makes it easier to believe something. And that's why just simple arguments just kind of break apart under. Yeah, I mean, in the ancient world, you have a person claiming that a group of people saw that. And then that story gets passed down. And what happens? Then you have groups of people were talking about this one person saying that this other group of people saw this, and it's a snowball effect. That's clearly why it is made to believe that he was crucified and he resurrected. That's what the Quran says. It only takes just one person, one very vocal person, make up a story of a group of people supposedly seeing all this and passing it down, and then well, it's like a snowball effect, and it just keeps spreading and spreading and spreading. In the end, let me know what you guys think in the comment section. Subscribe, like, comment, and share. Thank you guys for all your support, and until next time, peace.